Hello there, welcome to the second part of the hair tying tutorial. In this video we are going to make some assets, walk through methods, which give you the ability to make almost any kind of hair types. And let me show you some examples. Here's the curly hair. You can see it's a combination of some clamped hair and non-clamped hair. We are going to make these hairs by combining some layers. And also here is dreadlocks we have here. Of course, please concentrate on the tail part because I didn't want to make a complete hairstyle because these dreadlocks usually begin from the roots, and I was just working on the tail, and it's just for showcasing. And it's just a regular wavy hair, and it's also a combination of clamped hair and non-clamped hair. And also in the base part, in the tight hair, we have some randomness. Also, we have some random color in it, which we are going to walk through how you can achieve this kind of randomness in your hair. And after making these assets, you can make almost any kind of hair types. And after you learned curly hair, you can easily make coily hair like this. Okay, now let's jump into it. Okay friends, in here we have my character, and before everything I want to note that you can style this base part of your hair. Let me turn this off. You can see that I style a little bit in here, and it really depends on the shape of my base hair I want to have. I wanted some curve shape like this in here, and also you can have some forms in this part by sculpting this hair. And it's better for having better performance, just turn this off, and after sculpting this however you want, turn this on and check how your hair is shaped. The first thing I want to do in here is adding a little bit more detail to this scattering around node group, which we made in the previous tutorial. In here, when we were making this shape, scattering some spline around the main Bezier curve, we used the function of circle, which means that all the sections of this shape along my Bezier curve is always a circle. And in here I don't want that. I want the section to be circled just around this part. Let me turn it on. This off. Okay. Just around this part, because in here I would have my hairband, hair tie, so the hair shape in here should be something about a circle. But when it comes down to the end of the tail, it shouldn't be like that. It should be something like this, an ellipse. It means when the factor of my spline is 0, I want my section to be a circle. And when it goes to 1, I want the shape, my section, to be like an ellipse. And how can I do that? Well, it's just enough to reduce one of these scales, the scale of one of these vectors, which in here one of them is normal and the other one is the cross product of normal and tangent. So let me check if it works. I want to use the scale after this scale before connecting this scale node to the add node. Let me scale it again and scale it down. Let me see what will happen. Okay, if I call it the depth of hair, the depth is reduced while the width is the same. Let me change it. Let me just turn the base hair off for better performance. And by the way, you can go into the group node by hitting the tab key and out. Now let me show you. I can reduce it. I can keep my this dimension while I'm reducing the depth of my tail. Okay, but as I said, I want to have the control over this depth value along my Bezier curve, and in the beginning of my curve, I want the section to be circle, which means this scale should be 1. And at the end, I want to have the ellipse section, which means this scale should be reduced to any other value, like 0.5. Well, I can come here and simply use a combination of, not this one, spline param and using the factor, and also the color ramp. I want to connect this to the scale. Now let me check. Okay, at the beginning the scale should be 1, so I need the color to be white. And at the end I want to, for example, the value should be 0.5. Okay. I also can have control over my section along the length of my Bezier curve, something like this. But I want to have a depth scale slider in my node group in here. And how can I have that? So I'm going to use a node called mix node. It's exactly like the color mix. And in this node, when the factor is 0, it means that the output is A, and when the factor is 1, the output is B. So I want the A to be 1 in here, because I want my circle section, and the B will be my depth scale, which I'm going to connect this to the input. And I want to call it depth scale. Okay. And simply connect this color to the factor of my mix. And I connect this mix node to the scale. And here I want to set this on black because it's a factor, and go out for controlling my depth scale. Of course, I need to change the color, something like this. I want to keep it a circle as long as my hairband exists. And of course the depth in here is a little bit too thin. Okay, something like this for now. Let me go. Okay. Okay, now in here I have the control over this color ramp, which controls my hair section shape, and also have some control over this float curve, which gives me the control over my tail scale along my curve length. And I also want to let me show you. It's a little bit wobbly in here. I don't like that. I want to keep it straight, so I'm going to select this point and set this on this option. Doesn't work, this option. Okay, it works. Now I think this node is done, and of course the scale, the total scale, is multiplied by 0.01 to have a better slider. I can control it better, sliding this easier. Also, I have my depth scale. Okay, this was my first asset, and I'm going to make the second one, which is so much similar to this scattering around node group. In this node group, we were moving each duplicated splines around our main curve to shape like a circle. Okay, and this time I want to work on a single spline, and I want to convert this to the spiral. It means that I should work on the points, not on splines. Well, first let me use a set position. And I have a complete explanation on how to convert your simple spline to the spiral in my growing string tutorial, which the link is in the card. But in here I'm going to have a little bit of explanations. Well, in the previous node group, when we were scattering splines around our main curve, we were using random thetas. But in this part, we are working on each points, and means that I should have an order. And in here, the function is exactly like the function of the circle, which using the combination of sine and cosine. But this time, we are going to give the factor of the curve as our theta to the sine and cosine. It means when the factor grows, our theta should grow either, so we can shape a circle. So let me bring the spline param and use the factor and doing all the same stuff we did in the previous node group, using sine and cosine, which is the mass node, and set on cosine and sine, and also using the normal, because we want our spiral always be along our curve. So I'm going to use those local vectors, which one of them is normal, and the cross product of normal and tangent. And using cross product, scale again, add them together, and of course, for having control over our spiral radius, I'm going to scale it before connecting this to the offset. Okay, let me show you, scale it down a little bit. Well, you can see something. Well, in here, the factor is between 0 and 1, and it's not even a loop, because a loop is between 0 and 2 pi. So I'm going to multiply this to anything I want to have. Multiple loops. You can see I'm making my spiral, and the scale is too much. And here, first let me group them. Control G. Okay. Here is my total scale. I wanna, before connecting this to the input, I want to divide this by a higher number to have a better slider. So I'm going to use divide by 1000. Yeah, this is my divide node. I want to connect this to the first value. Now let me close this, close it. Let me check. Okay, in here we need some more details. First, I want this my frequency, which is here, to be random value. So I'm going to use random value node and connect this to the multiply in here. But since all of them are finally connected to the set position, it will give me the random value for each points. And I don't want that. I want the random value for each duplicated spline. So I need to first connect this ID to the input, and let me name it scale and move it up. Go out. Connect this duplicated index to the ID. Go in. And I want to set this seed to anything other than 0. And now let me also connect this min and max to the input. Now let me use it in here. Okay, you can see it's beautiful. And you know what? If you want to some of your splines rotate clockwise and some of them counterclockwise, you can set the mean to some negative value like minus 25, and the max, set this to 25. Okay, now you have random rotations in your hair. Now all of my spirals have the same amount of radius, and their radius is actually the scale, the total scale. So I'm going to use some random scale in here. Use the scale again. Random value. And I want to connect the ID because I want random value for each duplicated spline, not for each point. And set this to anything other than 0. It should be between, not should be, it's your choice. 0.8 to 1. Well, I'm going to have control over my scale, over my curve length, so I'm going to use the scale again and spline param with float curve. Well, it depends on you if you want to use the float curve or color ramp. Connect this to scale and let me check. For seeing better, let me first increase the scale and now go in. Okay, I don't want this curl shape in the beginning in this part, so, and I want to have them almost in any other places. You can have such thing, you see. Okay, for now it's okay. And I think we are done with our second asset. Okay, I can name them like curl noise. Okay, and for the last asset I'm going to use, which is actually our simplest node group, I'm going to use a noise texture and also set position. Okay, now if I just directly connect this color to the offset, of course by scaling that, you can see that it's moving along a vector, and that's because of the noise texture output value range, which is between 0 and 1. And we need a more symmetric range of numbers, so I'm going to subtract this by a 0.5 so I can have this range of number. Let me do that, and not this subtract. Since a color is a vector, I'm going to vector mass subtract by 0.5 and then connect that to the scale. Now let me check. Okay, first let me have control over my scale by divide this number. I want to have better slider. 1 by 100. Okay, if I set this on a higher scale, you can see that the starting point is moving. Of course I can use a color in here, but I want to make sure that my starting points won't move. So I'm going to use a selection in here, endpoint selection, and as I did before, I'm going to first use the starting points, which are the root points, and after that I'm going to use the Boolean math, set it on not, which means that it's not selecting what is previously selected. Okay, now if I increase this, you can see that my beginning point's position is constant. And let me group them first. Control G. Okay. Of course, I wanna first have scale. And let me show you something. Let me go out and turn off this curl noise, mute it. And now if I play with this noise, you can see that the noise texture is simultaneously applied to all of my hair. And I don't want that. I want each duplicated spline, each of my hair strands have a unique noise texture. So I'm going to go in the noise texture and set this on 4D, which gives me a W parameter, which actually acts like a seed. So I'm going to connect this W to the input and set this on ID and set this on integer. Let me move it up. Okay, now go out and I want to connect the ID to the duplicate index. Okay, now each curve has a unique noise texture. And now, like before, I wanna use some random scale in here. Random value and ID, change the seed, somewhere between, I don't know, 0.8 to 1. And another scale to have control over my noise texture along my curves. Float curve. You can see how I type this. I just type F space C and it gives me float curve. Okay, now it means that in the beginning I will have 0 noise texture, and at the end I have all of my noise texture. And I can set this to something like this one. Okay. Now let me go out and increase the scale. Of course you can go in and change the scale of noise texture. And I want to connect this scale to the input and call it noise scale. And of course you can connect all of these if you want to have an asset, and also you can directly connect this scale to the output, to the input, and move all of this float curve stuff outside of your node group. But I want to make things much cleaner, so I want to keep them inside. Now I have my noise scale. Let me check. Okay. Okay, these are our main 3 assets, and we can play with them, make almost any kind of hair types with only these 3 node groups. And let me note that the curl noise in here is converting your existing spline to the spiral. So sometimes you can move it to the end, because first you wanna sometimes you wanna something like this. You wanna some noise at the end of your hair. Let me show you. scale this one down, and you wanna convert these existing strands to the spiral. So you will connect these curl nodes at the end of your node groups and give the ID, and yeah, this will be your effect. And of course you can change the scale, play with the parameters. You can see that you have lots of control over everything. These noise texture parameters, these are frequency of your curl noise, and this is the scale. And now we are going to let me just cut this. In here I want to first start with some clamped hair, to have some strings like this in here. I'm going to duplicate the elements in here. I want to keep this for now and move it up a little bit. Okay. I duplicated them, but this time I want to set this to a lower value, something like 50. And I want to scatter some splines around it. Let me connect this. You can type R and have a route. Connect this to here. And make sure to hit this number button, because it will give you a copy of this scattering around node group. Because if you don't do this and you go in and change any of these parameters, they will also change this node group's parameters inside. So I want to make copy of this, and after that I want to give it a little bit of curl noise. I can of course name it noise, simply noise, simple noise. I'm going to use the curl noise in here, and of course connecting the ID, and hit this number button. You can see that we are having something already. Let me turn it off. I wanna make sure that I have a good scale in here. Of course, please don't stick to the values I'm going to play in here, because I'm just recording the tutorial. I don't have enough time for tweaking all the exact numbers. There are lots of parameters, lots of curves in here, and it depends on your character scale, your hair scale, size. So just focus on the methods and the workflow in here. Now for the next step, I'm going to use these duplicate elements again, because I want to use this string as my base clamped strings. And I want to use and scatter around again and hit this button. Now duplicate index, scale it down. Okay, you see, pretty simple. Just with these two assets I'm going to have my shape. And of course I want to increase the number in here, and for now just let me set it on 100. And of course in here I want to have some random radius in these clamped strings. I want some of these clamped strings be thinner and some of them thicker, and well, it depends on the idea of each base string, these strings I mean. I want to have some random scales based off each duplicated splines in here I have. I mean this ID, not this duplicate ID, okay? So I should go inside this scatter node group. I want to have some extra details in here. Now let me go and use another scale, another random value, connect this to the scale and change the seed. I want to connect this ID to the input and name it as string ID and move it up. Okay, in here I have a string ID. I want to, instead of connecting this duplicate index, I want to connect this index to the string ID. You can see that they are between 0 and 1. I don't want that. I want to be, I don't know, between 0.6 to 1. Okay, now you can see that some of the strings are thinner and some of them are thicker. And after that, I want the tips to be thinner. So I should multiply all of this by a float curve again. So using another scale and this combination, connect this to scale. Or I just can simply use this factor in here, connecting to the value. Okay. Let me change it. I want the radius to be 1 to about this part. So I bring it in here. And I can reduce the size. I don't want the tip to be exact 0. A little bit higher than that. I can also have some random scale. You can see the control you can have in here, the amount of control. But there is also something else. All of them at the tips have almost the same scale, and they are so small. I don't want that. I want some of them to be thicker and some of them be thin like this. Or I can say that I want this float curve to be applied on some of these clamped strings by its full power and on some of them by a lower power. So I should use some kind of random value in here. And here is where I'm going to use the mix node again. When the scale in here is 1, it means that this float curve has no any effect at all. So when I apply this float curve to the scale, I will have my effect. So I'm going to put 1 as my A input and this float curve as my B input. Okay, when it's on 0, the factor, it means it has no effect at all. And when it's on 1, I have all power of my float curve in here. And I'm going to use the random value in here as my factor. And of course, I need random value for each clamped string. So I'm going to use this string ID into my random value ID. Now connect this to the factor. And let me see. It's between 0, 0 means no effect at all. I want all of them to have a little bit of effect of this float curve. I want to put it to something like 0.4. Well, it's your choice, you can play with it. And of course you can connect this to the input and make it as a separate scattering around node group. As I said before, I don't want you to just follow my steps and only reach the final results in here. I want you to learn how things work, so I'm trying to explain everything in here as much as I can. Now let me go, and I think these tips are a little bit too thin. Of course, before these nodes, you can see that they almost have the same height. I wanna trim it also in here. I'm going to use this combination. Okay. change the C a little bit lower, and let me turn this on. Okay, isn't it better? And of course, you don't need to always use the random value. You can even use a noise texture in here. Using the factor. And of course, you need to multiply the factor. You can give a unique noise texture to each clamped string by connecting this duplicate index to W parameter. You can change the scale. Something like this. You see? Okay, now in here I'm just going to stick with the random value. Now after that I'm going to, let me show you, I'm going to use trims also in this part. And by holding shift and right click I can have a node in here and connect this to this node and control X to control X to delete that. Okay, I have my random trims also in here. You can see, let me turn this off and on. Yeah. And after this scattering around, you can see that all of these hair strands are so straight, and I want some noise in them, so I'm going to use the noise texture, the simple noise, with this duplicate index. Hit the number button to copy, to make a copy of this. Scale it down. Increase this noise scale to 20. And let me go inside the node group. I want this noise texture. This curve is for the previous node group, and I don't want this to be like it in here. I'm going to apply this here, and at the end I want less noise to have my tips. If I increase this number at the end, you can see I'm losing the clamp tip in here. I want to reduce this a little bit higher than 0. Okay, I want to make sure that it's 0 at the beginning, because I don't want to make this part so noisy, because I don't want my hairs come out of my hair tie object. Scale it up. Okay, after changing this curve, you can go outside and reduce this scale in here. Okay, now for the end you can increase this number 400. And well, these are just only some clamped strings, and I should fill them with some non-clamped hair. So to have a similar shape but non-clamped, I'm going to use these node groups also in here. Delete the curl noise, scattering around, and I'm gonna keep this for now. Now let me connect this to the trim. And let me check. When you're using this scattering around, you can change the depth scale to, let me turn this off to show you. You can change the depth scale to 1 to have circular strings in here, but you can also keep this to 0.5 or something else, or even thinner. But 0.5 is okay for now, or 0.6. And for your final results in here, if you want to check, please don't stick to the viewport, because in viewport the strands are so thick and they don't have any translucency. When you render them, they look so much thinner, especially when we set the radius to small value in here, and they also have translucency. They even look thinner, and you can also give them simply a hair BSDF material, well, a principal hair BSDF. This is my principal hair BSDF. Let me just cut this off first, and I set the redness on 0 and melanin on 0.5. Now let me check the render. Okay, in here I have a little bit of noise in the strings. I can increase it or increase the scale of it in here. On 5 or 25. Of course, you can go inside and change the details to, I don't know, 1.2, the roughness, give a little bit distortion. Now let me check it again. Okay, now you can see the details in here. And of course, they are not the exact values in here. You can change it however you want. And you can also check the depth, because I think this non-clamped hair should have a little bit of more depth to fill the spaces between clamped strings properly. I set it to 0.6. Okay. Now for the next part, I'm going to just cut them and focus on my base part. And this part. In here they are just simple hairs. I didn't duplicate anything, so I don't have a duplicate index to use in these node groups as ID. So how can I have each hair strand's ID in here? Well, if I use the ID or index node, I won't get anything. It will be, let me go to geometry node tab and this spreadsheet. If I view this ID, you can see in the splines I don't have any viewer stuff in here, but in control points I have viewer, which gives me the ID of each points, not each spline. So how can I have ID for each splines? I can, in here, I don't know, maybe there is a node or a simpler way for this, but I use capture attribute, and that's also simple and works totally fine. The important part is set this capture attribute on a spline instead of points. If I just connect this ID to the points, and I can of course set this to integer. Now let me view this. If I set it on point, I will have the ID for each points like before, like when we directly connect this to the viewer. But if I set this on a spline, you can see I don't have a viewer anymore in these control points, and in the spline I have viewer, which gives me each spline's ID in here. So the attribute, the output attribute in here is my spline ID, and I can use them in my node groups. Pretty simple. First, I'm going to give a little bit of randomness in this shape. This is so simple and uniform. Let me use simple noise texture. Okay, I want to. You can see if I don't connect the ID, this ID to the input ID of my node group, it will simultaneously give the noise to all of my hair strands. And let me connect this ID. I only want some noise in the middle part of the hair, so I'm going to go in and I want something like this for now. Going out, reduce the scale to, I don't know, 5. Okay, I can see that the frequency is too much. And at this step, I don't want that. I want a large noise scale. I mean, a large noise texture, which means that I should set this value to small number. 0.1, okay, I have something even smaller. I can go in and reduce the detail. Okay, you can see that I'm having large noises in here. Something like this. At the first step, I just needed some large noises, and after that, I'm going to apply some small noises over the large noises. Of course, these are not the final values, and you can change it however you want. And over that, I'm going to use another noise, make a copy of it, connect the ID. Now increase the noise scale, I don't know, to 5 or even higher, 12. Okay, now we have our little tiny details. Reduce the scale a little bit. And of course, if you want, over these existing splines, you can apply your curl noise. Hit this number to copy the curl noise. And of course, I want to go in and change this float curve. Okay, now I'm going to go outside and reduce the scale. Let me first turn this off to check what I have in here. Let me first check. Okay. And please make sure that you resample it. Before that, I think I resampled that before, but doesn't matter because I used some set positions in here and it shifted some points near each other. I want to resample it again. Set this on length 0.002. Okay, let me turn it off. You see the difference. If I set these both two numbers to a same value, I can have an idea about what my curl noise would be. I want to set this on 80, scale 1. Or even minus 100. Okay, something like this. And you can both turn these nodes on. Now I'm going to show you how you can add some random color to your hair. Let me, for having better performance, turn all this off. And I'm going to use an attribute in here. Store name attribute, and set this on color. Use a noise texture. Using the factor in here, say random color. And for viewing this, I should use name attribute to call this one, copy, paste, and view. Okay, let me increase the scale. You can see that the noise is being applied on each points. It's working on the points, but I want to work on the splines. I'm sorry, I forgot to set this on a spline. If you set this on a spline, you don't need to connect this ID to the W parameter of noise texture. You can set this on 3D and it will work fine for you. Just increase the scale to 200, I don't know, detail 2, roughness 0.6, and you can also give some distortion if you like. Okay, you can change the parameter however you want. Also, I want to add this attribute to the tail part of my hair. Well, I can't just store this attribute after joining all of them together because this base scale is different than the tail scale. I mean the noise texture scale. You can test it. I want to connect this to here. And let me view the tail part. I should change the scale. Okay. For now, you can check it on render. And it will automatically add this attribute to the previous one, and you will have no problem at all. I can delete them, turn them on. Also want to change a little bit of the trim value of this scattered hair. Okay. And before that, I forgot to go to the material and show you how you should use this attribute. In here, I imported the attribute with the attribute node. You can go into the input and use attribute. I don't need this. I set the attribute name to my name, which I was using in the geometry node editor. Let me show you. Okay, now you can see some randomness in here, and I used a color ramp for having control over my contrast and the values, because I want to connect this color to the melanin, and my melanin is 0.5, so these numbers should be somewhere around it. I want the randomness between almost 66 and 30. Now let me connect it to melanin and use this one. And now let me check. Well, in here you can see that the strings, the clamped strings, are exaggerated. The spaces hasn't been filled enough, and it means that you should play with the params. And at the last part, I'm going to show you my values which I used in this render. And you can see the random color in here. Okay friends, here is the parameters I used in this wavy hair. Well, the first part is the clamped strings, which I used a duplication amount of 50, the scattering around these values, and let me go inside the node. The curl noise values, and in here I used a color ramp, but no difference, you can use a float curve. After that I use a large noise with this curve, and also the noise params are like this. After that I trimmed, and duplication amount of 300. The scattering around, the scale is 1.4, and in here it didn't have any depth scale. Also noise again with a scale of 5, noise scale 20. Let me check out the float curve, and these are noise params. Also the trim value, a non-clamped hair, duplication of 2000, scattering around, a noise texture. Also this is the curve, params, the trim, and for the attribute I used this noise texture with a scale of 100. And for the base part, the tight hair, I use a noise with this scale. We go inside with random values between this and a color ramp, params. After that, curl noise with this scale. You have lots of controls and params in here. You can see how much control you can have in geometry nodes when you are working on hair or anything. And here is a simple noise, but the smaller noise in the third step. And these are the parameters. Okay. For the color attribute, I use this scale for it. Of course, it depends on your density, your scale, your character size. And I use the resample curve in here with a length value of 0.005, but I prefer 0.002, especially when I'm creating curly hair or coily hair. And now that's it. In the next step, I'm going to make dreadlocks. Okay, now we are going to make this kind of dreadlocks. Of course, there could be multiple kinds of it, and of course some of them are extensions, some of them are braids, And by the way, you can also import the braids, which I made in the previous tutorial. And if you want to import this in the hair object, you should remove that part which converts the curve to the mesh. After deleting that part, you should be okay. First, let me delete the previous stuff. For now, just let me turn this off. And let me disable the trim curve in here, mute it, and also mute this one. Delete this. Also delete this scattering around. Okay. For now, I want to keep curl noise and the scattering. I want to scatter it for 35 times. Okay, and I want the scale to be so much small, like 6. And the depth of the scattering should be a little bit higher than that, because it's Dreadlocks. The hair strings are a little bit stiffer, so they should look like this, and a little bit of trim. Going to the next part, duplicating elements. For now, I want to set it on 200, and in the next part, I'm just going to use the noise, simple noise. Hit this number and ID. Okay. Now let me reduce the scale, and I want to increase the noise scale to 300. Okay, you can already see something. And just setting this little bit, details on 2, roughness on 0.6, a little bit of distortion could help. And please make sure that you are resampling this pretty well. I want to set it on 0.002 because it needs lots of details. And of course, at the end, I want to make sure that I'm trimming. And let me check my float curve, if I'm doing things in the right way. I'm not in here, I'm not using the scattering around asset because this simple noise asset can also do the same thing, almost. You can have control over the shape, how much it gets thinner. And go out the total scale. Okay, something like this. And at last the trim. Let me check it. Turn this off, mute, and unmute. Okay, it's better. Let me set it on 0.86. Let me increase the amount, 400. Okay, that's it. Of course, for having a complete dreadlocks style, you can use some real hair strands on the head and with a low density, of course, and apply only this few nodes to those hair strands, like what we did in here. And I want to note that in your renders, lighting is so important, especially in the hair. If you want to have capture all the details, showing the translucency of the hair. Okay friends, do you see in here all these fluffy hairs and the details? And that simply has been made with only these three assets. And I used path guiding in here, and also for the light path I set it to 32 because there might be holes and cavities. We might probably need some light bounces, so it's better to increase this amount. And of course, for having a sharp image, let me just tell you a great rendering tip. In the film section and in the pixel filter, by default this value is 1.5 pixel, and that's a little bit too much. I reduced this to a lower value, especially when I need more details. I usually set this on 1.15 or 1.2 sometimes, but this number is good. And of course, in the viewport, for having better detail, you need to set this on 2 or 3. I set it on 3. And yeah. And let me tell you something, in rendering, and almost in every situation, you need to catch the details, give some highlights to your objects, and especially in this part, in the hair. Let me show you. I needed some highlights, and of course I needed to capture these shadows. So make sure that you are preparing good lighting for your scene. And yeah, that was it. And for the next step, we are going to make a curly hair. Okay, in here we're going to have this curly hair. First I'm going to make the clamped strings. And I want to, of course I cut the base part and mute them. Okay, with the scattering part, I'm going to have the scale of about 7, a little bit higher. And of course the depth scale should be smaller. 0.5 for now. Okay, after that I'm going to give a little bit of noise in the scattered hair. So I'm going to use this simple noise in here. Hit this number and connect the ID. Okay, let me check. I want to make this curly hair a little bit exaggerated, like this render. Of course, since they are a little bit stiffer, in reality this will happen to this curly hair. That might be a little bit too much, but let me go for now and adding the curl noise. Okay, and if you want to have the effect, make sure that you are giving enough sample to your hair. And the scale 4.5. And trim for the ending part. Okay, and you might see in your viewport these are a little bit crispy and jagged, but in your render it won't be like this. And I want to duplicate them. After that, this time I want to scatter it like the Dreadlocks. I just want to use this noise texture instead of scattering around, because it gives me a noisy scattered hair around my base curves in here, and I don't need any extra controls. That's okay for me. 400 is too much. 35, and the noise scale is too much, of course. Okay, let me go inside and let me check the beginning. Of course, the initial count is a little bit lower than what we need. I want to set it on 100 first. Okay, these are the parameters of noise, but I don't know if it works for now for this curly hair. And it should be higher than this. 400. Okay, now I have my curl noise beginning from the start, almost the start, and I have a larger scale at the start of my hair. Okay. Now I'm going to add the non-clamp hair. Let me turn this off for having better performance. Okay. I want to copy these nodes. And also a trim curve. Okay. I want the depth to be a little bit higher in here because I want to make sure that it's fitting the clamped hair. And for having my attributes, I want to join these together first. And let me check the count. Yeah, the count is too low. 4,000 might be enough. Okay, we have our curly hair. In here I don't have a proper lighting for this kind of hair in here, but you can see that it's working pretty fine. And here is my curly hair. I think that the clamp hair strings count is not high enough. Of course, I want to say that again, these values aren't the final production ready values, okay? I just wanted to show you how things work in here, and you can play with your parameters, or you can make your new styles, everything you want. I think these methods and the assets are enough for making almost everything. And you can even add more layers of finer details and have your exact hairstyle you want. Okay friends, I think that's it, and sorry if it took a little bit long. I think it was the longest video. And if you're new to the channel, please check my other videos, and if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to the channel, and if you like the video, please hit the like button. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have nice moments and peace. Goodbye friends.